Welcome back, everybody. I hope you are refueled, recharged with some coffee in you. I know I am. And really, really excited because you need to be fueled up for the space tech conversation that we're going to be hearing now. This keynote followed by a wonderful conversation. I was asking about how to intro our keynote now, and I was told by Selma here, a legend, right? A true legend. So in a moment, Candace Johnson will be coming on stage. She represents, or she's from Seraphine Space, but that's just one of many, many things that she's been involved in the space tech industry, having founded SES in 1983. That's over 40 years ago, one of the very early satellite leaders. She truly is a pioneer in driving space tech forward, and that's why it's really an honor to welcome Candace on the stage, who will be followed by a wonderful panel conversation to finish it off. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Candace.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be back in Austria. And all of those people over there, do you want to come to the middle? It might be nicer. I'm going to start with a few anecdotes about myself and that you don't read in the internet and that you don't read in the normal biographies. So my father was the head of military telecommunications for the United States government. So I grew up, first of all, when I was 5, that was 1957, I received a toy Sputnik to put on the Christmas tree with Santa Claus. I thought everything good came from space. When I was 10, my dad, who was at the White House, he came to my 5th grade class. That's so we were 10 years old in the United States, you go to the 5th grade. And it was kind of like, show and tell, but your parents came. And he came and he talked about satellite telecommunications. He had been lent by the United States Air Force to the White House, to President Kennedy, to work on the Apollo mission and to build the first satellites for the United States government. And so he said, when we have satellite communications, satellites, we will have telecommunications, we will have education, we will have entertainment, and when we have wars, this is 1962, we will have wars in space, and we will have peace on Earth. So, this is what I grew up with. And I think that it's, we are at a very critical time in our lives. And, I was asked to talk about investing in dual use. And unfortunately, dual use means defense and civil use. And so, this is a picture from the war in Ukraine. And this is a picture from the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It is terrible. It is, we have to do something about it. And, I'm always telling my friends that they say, Candace, how do you do this, et cetera, et cetera. And I say, it doesn't really matter what you do. Choose your weapons. And for me, space has always been a way to bring about positive change. And a few years ago, my colleagues and I at the EBON Space Committee, which of course I started when I was president of EBON in 2014, we were worried because we saw that there was a proliferation of satellites in the low Earth orbit, that people were using space perhaps not responsibly as they could. And so we wrote the EBON Space Manifesto for a clean, safe, equitable, and peaceful space for all. And, basically, we are still living by this, and I'm so glad that we wrote this manifesto. You can look at the EBON website and you can see it. But really, it is all about making certain that we use space to bring about peace, and that we also give all countries, no matter which countries, the possibility to access space for their needs. And You know, when I was in, let me see, I was in high school, and my dad had left the United States White House and had been asked to go to Vietnam. And he was the head of all military telecommunications in Vietnam. So this was 1968. I got to live in Hawaii, but he was traveling throughout the Pacific, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, etc. And I would wear peace beads to school. And I was 16 years old. And everybody said, Candace, you can't wear peace beads. Your dad is a general and he's fighting a war. And I said, my father is fighting for peace. And I still believe that when we fight, we have to fight for peace. Now, as it turns out, and this is a spectrum and a pendulum that actually has been going for a very long time. When telecommunications in space was first brought in 1967 via satellites, it was the space race. It was the Russians against the world. And when I was also growing up, I would learn about fiber optics because they were good for the battleground, or mobile communications. And then what happened is that the technology went from being used for defense to the civilian. And not only did the technology go, but the whole innovation went. And it was then the civilians who were innovating on telecommunications and Earth observation. Now, and then the pendulum swings back, where all of the governments of the world now today are looking to the civilian space and to the civilian operators for innovation. And so, if you just think fast forward, surveillance, well, here we are, we're looking at the Earth, we're looking for weather patterns, we're looking for agriculture patterns, and guess what? We can also detect troops and tanks, just like we detect agriculture and people who are, bad operators in the environment. It's the same technology. And we also, we are using cybersecurity. If you knew what was going on in cybersecurity in space, you would be absolutely amazed. So it is not at all a big difference between civilian use of space and defense use of space. And, one thing which is very sobering is that Ukraine is the world's first space-based and space-enabled war. Be it for communications, be it for tracking and positioning, be it for the drones, be it for HAPS, high altitude power platform systems, be it for identification of soldiers and tanks, and also be it for war in space. And we're also seeing the use of autonomous systems. And it is, I was so disappointed when I went to a conference on autonomous systems. And, I think being an entrepreneur, you always are thinking ahead. And so I was really thinking ahead, and I was foreseeing that day when instead of people getting killed, it would be robots getting killed. We're not there yet. But this is absolutely something that we have to work on. And of course, with autonomous systems, the number one preoccupation of governments is that the final decision always rests with the human. So very, very important. But I do believe, that autonomous systems can make a big difference, just as I believe that AI, people are so worried about AI, artificial intelligence, which is still really machine learning. All of this can be used for the good, as we have always seen. And those same technologies, by the way, that surveillance, the bringing of communications, looking at the borders, it's the same thing that is happening in Gaza. And we are using space for humanitarian reasons, to track and position the people in need, to use drones to get them to deliver food and medication. I just got an email from a friend of mine, a friend of ours, Salma and myself, Victoria Hernandez, who is in Spain and who has been reached out by the Spanish government. And what could we do? I wrote back and I said, damn it, get drones in there to give the food, to just drop that food and drop that medication to those people in Valencia. This is so important. Get Amazon on the phone and give them a contract and get it done. So it's the same thing, and also with telemedicine, so with communication, also via satellite, all of this is being used for humanitarian or for war. And you can see here the drones that are indeed bringing medication to the people in Gaza. And now, please look, what is happening in the South China Sea? Well, what is happening there is that it's a different type of war. It's a war where China is trying to basically blockade Philippines, Taiwan, Fiji, Vanuatu, all of these island countries to either block the satellite communications or to block the undersea cable. And of course, then satellites can play a very important role so that they're not getting the communications that they need, that they're not getting deliveries. The fishermen in the Philippines, they are worried to death that one day they really will be just sucked in by the huge Chinese Navy vessels that are in the South China Sea. And, so here I'm showing a picture of this system, Pacific. It's a system that my colleagues and I, Oceania Women's Network Satellite, we created 12 years ago. We created it to bring social good to all of those islands in the Pacific. Education, healthcare, hotel broadband, industry, government, public safety. Do you know what our number one financial driver is right now? If you just think about this, we cover all of the strategic areas that the United States is looking at. And so we are receiving huge contracts. It wasn't what we had anticipated, to be able to provide communications to all of those islands and to stave off the onslaught of China. And I also then want to talk about space itself. Back to the future. Here we are, 1957, the Russians. And then when that pendulum swung, guess what? If you look at the top of that picture, you'll see Astra. And in 1995, I worked with Lockheed Martin and with Khrushchev in Russia to be able to commercialize the first Russian rockets. And this was a beautiful day because it really was international peace in space. And I cannot tell you how sad I am, though it's absolutely the right thing to do, that today this rocket, which I worked so hard to get accepted throughout the entire world, can no longer bring Occidental satellites into orbit and is thus causing us great problems. People talk about data centers on the moon, and you say, well, data centers on the moon, that's really crazy. No, actually it's not. It's because, one, it's very cold, and with all of the generative AI and the fact that we need to have all of these data centers operating, it's a very good place to put the data centers, particularly if your communication bandwidth down to the Earth is good. But it's also, it always has these dual aspects. It turns out that doing data centers on the moon is a very secure way of making certain that our data is not stolen or jammed. And as we go forward, what's going to be the drivers for keeping peace, certainly energy. And so I'm working on a project now on space-based solar power, where we could basically, using something that kind of looks like a space station, but just with solar panels, bringing it down via microwave to the grid. And in 2040, we could be serving 20% of the world's needs. And it is these types of advantages that will help us in a world that is increasingly being defined by allies and non-allies. And, you know, in 1994, 30 years ago, I was on the founding team of Iridium. Now, Iridium is a low Earth orbit satellite system. It is absolutely the precursor of OneWeb, of Starlink, of Kuiper. And, you know, today, actually, it was very funny because when I was doing Iridium, people said, oh, no, it won't work, and this was 1994. And I said, guys, you know, I grew up with spy satellites. This is a spy satellite. It's a low Earth orbit satellite. And it had sensors instead of a payload of being communications, but it was the same idea. So you see this pendulum of dual use going throughout the world. And here again, connectivity will also be a weapon which must be used responsibly by everyone. And I thought I'd just share with you a little bit about space situational awareness, because people talk about Star Wars, but they don't really understand what it's all about. And so this basically is a little video that was done by a company where I'm the founding vice chair called North Star. And we are building a space-based space situational awareness, that from space, we can see and we can track and we can identify every intended and unintended object. And what that basically means with this 24/7, 360-degree system is that we can protect our assets in space. Not only our commercial assets, but also our defense assets. And the way it works is, if you see here, the little red satellite is one could actually even say perhaps China or Russia, and the white satellite is an allied satellite. Now look closely. What happens is we can detect when a satellite or something starts a trajectory that was not accepted. And what happens then is that little red satellite, you see, it goes around and it cases the white satellite. And what that basically means is that that red satellite, and then it goes back away. So it's gathering all of the information about that satellite so that when they want, they can come and they can jam the satellite. Very, very scary. Very scary. But, you know, I call this our early defense system. And, you know, it is not too early to talk about colonization of space, be it of the moon, be it of Mars, be it of the universe. And here again, those who go the quickest are the ones who will win. And so, you know, I said that I would talk about what you should be investing, we should all be investing in dual-use space for safety, peace, and prosperity on Earth and in the universe. This can be sensors, autonomous systems, AI for good, space launchers and space transportation. The people who get to go to space first and the most are the ones who are going to win. Software and onboard processing. You can have a copy of this. Networks for the universe, digital twins. And there is a United Nations organization that is called UNOSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. And they have the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. And this is something we all need to continue to think about. So in closing, and, you know, as I say, the networks for the universe, for, you know, transport, for energy, et cetera. I'm very excited about this. I've always said I went from using space to provide universal access to accessing the universe to now providing networks for the universe. Now, I'm going to close with the footprint, as James had so kindly said, you know, that in 1983, I was a founder of Astra, SES, Société Européenne des Satellites. Now, if you can imagine the footprint, this was the footprint that we did in 1983. And of course, you will recognize that there was no line between the East and the Western Europe. From the very beginning, we were convinced that we were going to cover all of Europe and that we were going to provide freedom of choice to all of Europe's citizens in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe. And on the great day that we launched our first satellite, ladies, I was the only woman, but you can see that, with the OwnSat, I changed that. And, it is very important because, they all laughed at me. They always said, oh, Candace, you think that you're going to cover all of Europe and that you're going to bring freedom of choice. And I said, yes, I really do. And finally, they believed in me. And they believed in the concept. And we did go on to build SES to become the world's largest satellite system, even today, doing all of the things that I have told you about in civilian and in defense. And, I'd like to end with a quote. So yes, we must all fight for peace. That's really what it's about. And I've always loved this quote by Spinoza. Peace is not an absence of war. It is a virtue, a state of mind, a disposition for benevolence, confidence, and justice. And that is what we have to use all of our resources to fight for. Thank you very much.